Hello everyone, my name is Sarah, and today we're going to be doing another collaboration. As you know, I am a part of the Stockbox Discord server, and some of us decided to do a galaxy-themed collab. I love space, so it was imperative that I join. After a few days of sketching and brainstorming, I decided on recreating the constellation Orion. As a child, it was my favorite, for the sound reasoning that it was relatively easy to find in the sky in the part of the world that I live in, and it was supposed to be most visible around October, which is my birthday month. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you what I learned about Orion when I was researching him. If you're not as big of a mythology nerd as I am, you can skip ahead to the time on the screen, but I think it's pretty cool. Starting off, Orion is one of the most conspicuous and recognizable constellations in the night sky. Its brightest stars are the supergiants, blue-white Rigel and red Betelgeuse. The earliest depiction linked to the constellation of Orion is a prehistoric mammoth ivory carving found in a cave in the Ache Valley in West Germany in 1979. Archaeologists estimate that it was fashioned approximately 32,000 to 38,000 years ago. The distinctive pattern of Orion is recognized in numerous cultures around the world, and there are many myths associated with this constellation. The Bible mentions Orion 3 times by the name Kessel, which, in Hebrew, translates literally to fool. In medieval Muslim astronomy, Orion was known as Al-Jabbar, the giant. In India, he was Natajara, the cosmic dancer, and an avatar of Shiva. Hungarian folklore knows the constellation of Orion as what translates to magic archer or reaper, which are Ijaz and Kasaz, respectively. In recently rediscovered myths, he is called Nimrod, the greatest hunter, the father of the two twins Hunor and Magor. The Ojibwa or Chippewa Native Americans call this constellation Kabibonakan, the winter maker, as its presence in the night sky heralds winter, meaning it shows up in the fall. Orion's belt is almost as famous as he himself, maybe even more so. Of course, this means that his belt has lots of other forms as well. The Seri people of northwestern Mexico call the 3 stars in the belt of Orion Hapsh, a name denoting a hunter which consists of 3 stars, Hap, the mule deer, Hamoja, the pronghorn, and Mohet, the bighorn sheep. Hap is the middle star and has been shot by the hunter. The 3 same stars are known in Spain and most of Latin America as Los Tres Marias, or the 3 Marys. In Puerto Rico, the 3 stars are known as Los Tres Reyes Magos, or the 3 Wise Men. And finally, my personal favorite. In Scandinavian tradition, it was known as Frigg's distaff, or Friggarok, or Freya's distaff. Orion has also found himself in various pop culture and fictional settings. In J.R.R. Tolkien's mythology surrounding Middle-earth, Orion is known as Menelvagor, which is Sindarian for the swordsman of the sky. A more recent example can be found in the sci-fi comedy Men in Black. The last words of a dying alien disguised as a human are, "To prevent the war, the galaxy is on Orion's belt." This is not an exhaustive list, and I apologize if, despite my research, I have mispronounced any of the names and terms in languages that I am not familiar with. So, which version of this constellation are we going to be making? Well, I am going to be making my interpretation of the Greek Orion, as this is the form I am most familiar with, even though it turned out I didn't know much about him at all. The myths I am going to retell in a minute represent the ancient Greek culture. It is different from the modern Greek culture, as well as probably nearly every other culture on the planet at this point in time. That being said, there are mentions of rape in many of Orion's other myths. I do not idolize him for the way he, and the culture that created him, treated women. My making him was a chance to share something that I loved innocently as a child and have learned so much more about in the past month. Let's get started. Like any good mythological figure, the circumstances surrounding Orion's birth are murky at best. One version is that he was the son of the god Poseidon and Uriel, the daughter of King Minos of Crete. She was also one of the 3 Gorgon sisters, meaning Medusa was his aunt? Another version of his birth is far more interesting, in my opinion. Hyrieus, a poor old farmer and beekeeper, provided hospitality once to Zeus and Hermes, and in return, he was granted the favor of a son. Hyrieus followed the god's instructions and buried the hide of a sacrificed bull in his wife's grave. He had to first add water to the hide, and lo and behold, Orion sprang from the earth 9 months later. Confusingly, in this version, he is the son of Hyrieus and again Poseidon. I would think his godly parent would be Zeus, but maybe it has to do with the water that was poured on the animal's skin. I don't know. If I were to sum up Orion in a sentence, it would be, Orion was the greatest hunter of Greek mythology who was famed for his good looks and many love affairs. There is one main myth of how Orion came to be a constellation. Of course, it has lots of branches and variations, but I'll do my best to keep it brief. Orion visited Crete, and during this time he hunted with the goddess Artemis and her mother Leto. Depending on the variation, he was either her friend or her lover. In one version, he declared one day that he could, and in fact would, kill every animal in the world. Gaia, the goddess of the earth, heard and was understandably upset by this. She sent a giant scorpion to kill Orion. Upon hearing the news, Artemis and Leto asked from Zeus to put their fellow hunter and friend in the skies. Zeus agreed and turned Orion into a constellation, as well as the scorpion that killed him. Another version of this myth suggests that Orion and Artemis had become very close, again, either romantically or platonically. However, her twin brother Apollo was jealous of their closeness, or was quite against their love affair. She is the goddess of virginity and maidenhood, after all. One day, while Orion was swimming in a lake with his head barely visible, Apollo went to his sister and challenged her skills as an archer. He said, "You're not that good of an archer. I bet you can't hit that thing out in the lake way over there." The thing way over there was Orion's head, which Artemis mistook as some type of non-Orion target. Artemis, of course, hit the target, unknowingly killing her lover/friend. Her love for the hunter, either platonic or romantic, was what turned him into stars this time. There are other versions of how Orion met his demise while entangled with Artemis. If you do look them up, be warned, there are more instances of sexual assault. So, getting to the doll, finally, we are going to be using Deuce Gorgon for this custom. Deuce is the son of Medusa, which makes him Orion's cousin? I don't think that's quite canon, but a cool coincidence nonetheless. The AMAB, or typically male dolls, have one more point of articulation than the AFAB, or typically female Monster High dolls. The ankles. The first step when preparing a male doll is to remove his helmet hair. The easiest way to do this is to pry it off with a knife or something similar. If you're lucky, you'll be able to pry it off all in one piece. Poor Deuce. It goes without saying, but be careful when you're working with any sort of knife or blade. Once the helmet is removed, you can pull out his piercing. I removed his arms at this point and sanded his body to make the plastic more receptive to dyeing, as well as to remove as much of his teeny tiny briefs as I could. Then I soaked the head in hot water until the vinyl was nice and soft. This allows you to yank the head apart from the body without breaking the neck or any of the structures inside. Now it was time to go where I've never gone before, at least with dolls. I originally started this project right after Doll Motion tried dyeing a doll body, and I was gobsmacked. It's one of those things that's so genius, yet so simple, you wonder how you never thought to try it before. I've dyed yarn, wool, and fabric before, so I figured this wouldn't be too hard to pick up. I dropped him in piece by piece and let him pickle until I was satisfied with the color. I had to turn him occasionally to get him to be entirely covered since his body really just wanted to float on top. The Rit Dymore worked pretty well, didn't it? There are a few splotchy bits, but that didn't really matter. I was going to cover that with pastels. I think I left him in for a bit too long because in the end, some of his joints had deformed. Not to the point where he was unusable, but he had some pretty floppy legs until I retightened the plastic by gluing it back together with super glue. For the pastels, I started with some blue tones all over his body to create some subtle differences, and to make the fact that his forearms, hands, feet, and head were made from a different plastic and were therefore darker, less obvious. Then I moved on to some reds and greens, and even a little bit of yellow at one point, though it really can't be seen in the end. I was taking inspiration from just how colorful space can be. I sealed each layer with a liquid matte varnish before adding more. For stars, I mixed up a white watered down white acrylic paint and flicked it on with an old toothbrush. These stars dried pretty pale and undefined. If that isn't what you want, I would recommend using less water and more paint. I, on the other hand, had other stars that I wanted to be, well, the stars of the show. Pun intended. Next was his face, which was pretty basic this time. I made his eyes a mixture of metallic silver paint and white. He doesn't have any pupils or shading since he isn't supposed to be solid. I feel like the lack of shading makes it look like he's part of the sky come to life. Clothing for both women and men in ancient Greece consisted of two main garments, a tunic, either a peplos or a chiton, and a cloak. Men in ancient Greece customarily wore a chiton similar to the one worn by women, but knee-length or shorter. The specific type of chiton I will be giving Orion is an exomis, which is a shorter version of the chiton, fastened on the left shoulder and was worn for exercise, horse riding, or hard labor. I feel like hunting and exploring goes under those categories. The cloak, or the himation, was worn by both men and women, was essentially a rectangular piece of heavy fabric, either woolen or linen. It was draped diagonally over one shoulder or symmetrically over both shoulders, like a stole. I ended up later making him a himation based on the pelt of one of the animals he has killed, but that doesn't show up much in this video. I had to draft all of his clothing from scratch, but since the exomis is pretty much a rectangle, it wasn't too hard. The only challenge was making sure it was big enough to drape properly. I had a lot of blue fabric at my disposal, but ultimately I decided to go with a dark navy cotton fabric. Nice and simple. Before I went any further with the clothing, I decided to reunite Orion's head with his body. That way I could make sure everything looked alright together. For his hair, one of my Claudine wolf dolls offered up herself as a donor, so I chopped it off. The very ends were a bit gluey, so I avoided using that part. It turned out that the first set of wefts I made didn't really seem like it would be enough, so I preemptively cut the hair in half to make more, and he was going to have short hair anyways. I decided against a wig and glued the weft straight onto his head using Elmer's fabric glue, creating something similar to a bowl cut. A little more history here. The ancient Greek men wore their hair long in childhood and then cut it off when they reached the age of puberty. The cutting off of their hair was a solemn act attended with religious ceremonies. These young men were represented in works of art with their hair quite short in a manner that was also worn by athletes. The Athenians were different in the fact that when they passed into the age of manhood, they again let their hair grow long. I decided to keep his hair short, like maybe he was an athlete since he was old enough to have grown his hair out again. For the very center, I rolled up a weft of hair and glued it on top to keep Orion from looking like a Franciscan monk. Once everything was thoroughly dry, I poured boiling water over his head to get all the hair to lay down. All that was left for the hair was to trim it up until I was satisfied with his look. Back to the clothes. The eggs and meese needed a shoulder button to mimic that brooch or pin I mentioned before, so I marked out where snaps would fit the item best, and once they were attached, I sewed on a gold button to look like it was holding the fabric together. Under the armpit on the side opposite to the button we just sewed on, I added a few discreet stitches here and there to give the fabric a nice drape on this scale. I also added some to the part of the fabric that hung down from the button, so it would look nice once he was wearing his belt. The Greeks wore laced sandals, men and women alike. On this small scale, I decided it would be best to make something that was a little bit simpler, but still reminiscent of the style. The soles were made of polymer clay, and I indented them where I wanted the leather straps to go. At this point, with what clay I had left over, I made his club, which is his most common weapon in the myths. I painted it and the shoes to match the body. I attached the leather straps I mentioned before to the sandals, measuring them against his feet. It's a bit of a tight fit, and the straps don't undo or release, but the sandals can be slipped on and off if you're careful. I also superglued one of them to my finger. The first dagger I made was a simple one made out of foam, but it looked a bit crap, so I made a new version. The blades were 2 pieces of cardstock sandwiched between a split chopstick glued back together, and then the hilt was made out of Das air dry clay that was glued on in the end. Ancient Greek shields were circular and usually curved, slightly like a bowl. I traced a measuring cup onto fun foam to get that perfect circle. Then I softened the foam over a candle and pressed it to the back of the bowl to make the perfect shape. Yeah, my first one was a bit burnt. The second one turned out much better, and I painted that just like I painted everything else so far. You can't have a constellation without its stars, right? I used several different images and illustrations of the positioning of Orion's stars to paint them onto his body. I first did them like I did Susie's spikes, using glue to create a 3D effect, and then painting over them, but I didn't like that. So I scraped them off very carefully and repainted them with just acrylic paint. I added the stars to the appropriate places on his shield, club, dagger, and iconic belt, as well as to his body itself. The very last thing I did was retrain the plastic of his hand so he could grip either his dagger or club without support. I did this by dipping the hand first in very hot water and then in very cold water. I really did enjoy researching and creating this constellation that caused me so much wonder in my childhood, even if the mythology surrounding him isn't all that enjoyable by modern standards. It was still a great project to tackle, and I am so glad that I got to try so many new things for the first time during it. As for the collaboration, it was great fun, and there are so many other dolls that were created by other designers from the Stockbox Discord, so check them out. I'll have the links down in the description, and if you're interested in joining the Discord, there will be a link for that too. Don't forget, I'm still looking for suggestions for future projects in the comments of any of my videos, so if you think there's something that I should make in my style, leave a comment and there's a chance that it'll be featured in my upcoming series this fall. I hope you all enjoyed and are having a good evening, morning, weekend, whatever it is. I hope it's a good one. Bye!